Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Traversing Stars podcast. How are my loyal listeners? Thank you for continued support. And remember, click the subscribe button, everybody. It's an amazing episode because boarding the mothership is Gabe Sokoloff. He's the composer of Waffles and Mochi's restaurant on Netflix. Now join us as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Sokoloff. Thank you so much for coming to the Traversing the Stars podcast.
Happy to be here. No problem.
Totally my pleasure, sir. I'm a fan of your work.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
So I always start off with a question of inspiration. So what inspired your love for music and who are your earliest influences?
Who inspired my love for music and my earliest influences? Well, I grew up in a musical household. They're like, parents were like big classic rock people. I didn't take to that genre so much, but I did find my first musical love in Steely Dan, who's still like probably my, rock gods. And I didn't really, maybe in my teens, I kind of got into like a indie phase where my friends and I all discovered certain bands together that I think are still really like influential in my style. Flaming Lips, Air, Broken Social Scene are some of the ones that come to mind there. Um, Music for picture was not something I was really tuned into um, at an early age. Unless you count some stage musicals, I did fall in love with Stephen Sondheim through his musical company, and that's in my DNA for sure. And probably the original orchestrations on a lot of the classic orchestrations on a lot of his musicals by this guy Jonathan Tunick are probably still like my strongest influence in terms of orchestration. Um, and as far as music for picture, um, I don't know. It's a diverse array. I love John Williams, a lot of the Alexander display Desplat stuff, however you say that, and Clint Mansell's scores grabbed me at an early age. Some of those I was at like when Requiem for a Dream came out and Moon. I was like at the age of the prime age for like being completely drawn into those films and like hit by them personally. And so I think his scores had a leg up in terms of getting into my bones.
One interesting thing about being a musician and composer is that you have to learn to write a piece of classical music. So how much is learning to compose music like learning a new language?
Well, I only speak English, so I'm probably not so well suited to answer that. Yeah, I don't know if I can't really answer the question literally, but just to kind of do my best, I think, I mean, it's certainly a language. It's a language. It's often called the universal language because it appeals to universal emotions. And I mean, actually, the way often music has often kind of struck me as like a way of expressing what language can. It's sort of getting, you know, into in terms of the emotions you're bringing out. It's almost you're entering like a finer. Uh, you're kind of communicating to the mind like in a more finely resolved way than words sometimes can. I think that's why music can be so powerful sometimes because we hear music and it makes us feel things and it surprises us because we've never felt those things before in that exact way because language alone, a story alone just can't do it. Some things defy description. And so I think music in a way works like, goes beyond where language can go. So yeah, I suppose in that sense, music is, a language and even like the ultimate language, or, probably have to say that about art in general. But of course, for me, I feel it most deeply with regard to music.
So you have worked on albums with singers like Adam Lambert and the Vamps. Is the mindset of contributing to a pop album different from developing a score?
Yes. Yes. Is mindset different? Yeah. I mean, of course, there are a lot of differences. I mean, for starters, pop is so trends based. And, you know, when you're crafting something for a pop album, particularly production wise, but even in writing too, um, you're trying to create something that, that's, I guess, on the cutting edge, something in terms of, I don't really mean that in a positive way, something that's, just the right degree, uh, at or beyond like what's trending at the moment. Something that pushes like what people are listening to, like a notch.
Hmm.
Um, but without getting into too much detail on that, the point is you're like hyper aware of like the the landscape, um, of yeah, what's out there. Score, there's still some truth to that, but it's more like, but it takes, the modernness of your score uh, usually takes a back seat to other factors, namely storytelling. Um, I will say, there's certain similarities too. I think in terms of, I've thought, as someone who does pop and scoring, I've kind of thought about this before, and thought about the similarities in my approach. And I will say one that's sort of come to mind before is, and this is personal. In fact, this is totally personal because I know a lot of people would say this totally flies in the face of of how many work. But I'm trying to kind of consider in both songwriting and scoring. I'm usually trying to consider like composition and arrangement, like as simultaneously as my brain can manage. Um, because in my mind, uh, you know, ideas in one realm can inform the other. There's, in ideal circumstances, you can get like an interactivity where you get an arrangement idea that inspires a compositional idea that inspires further arrangement idea. I don't like, I like to work non-linearly in that sense in both pop and scoring. Um, Again, I think that, a lot of people, a lot of both songwriters and composers, score composers talk about just sitting down at the piano and writing something on piano and then fleshing it out. And a lot of people also, to that same effect, a lot of songwriters say that a truly great song can be expressed with like a simple piano performance, so like you can kind of capture the essence of it. And I don't, I think that can be true, but I also think that if you write in that way, you might not have access to certain ideas that you would if you're sort of thinking about arrangement too, especially nowadays, like just given the styles. So like the styles that are popular. So yeah, big differences, but some unexpected similarities too, at least for me.
So, how difficult is it to collaborate with another artist? And when you're scoring, is that also collaborative, or is that a solo act?
Um, but well, first part of the question, I mean, it's so person by person, case by case, but um, I will say in the pop world, it's just like, I mean, if you're not, you're always collaborating. If you're not with the artist directly at that time, you're with other songwriters. As many people know, pop songs are often have like, credits with like, more than two, more than five, sometimes more than 10
I actually
songwriters.
didn't know that at
Oh
all.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And check out like, yeah, I mean, go on to like All Music or Wikipedia or something and like look at the writing credits on some big pop albums. Um, you know, chain smokers, whoever, like you'll see tons of writers. Hopefully that's a good example. I don't know, but yeah, Dua Lipa, like look at how many writers are on these things. So yeah, there's just so with pop, there's just a collaboration mindset from the start, and I think that probably um, that probably helps it go smoothly because like everybody in that world is completely used to it. You don't have, there's no one, um, even like the pop gods like Max Martin, like there's no one coming into a pop songwriting project, like, caught off guard by like having to collaborate. And that's not how they work. Like, no, that's not a thing. Um, as far as scoring, that's definitely much more of a solo practice. Of course, sometimes multiple composers collaborate, and there's often some collaboration between composers and session players when you get to work with them, or orchestras, um, and surely that has its own like kind of chemistry, um, and many composers have certain players that they're used to working with and like working with. I know that's a case for myself. And those are often people with whom I have that, intangible, like, creative rapport. Um, but it's not, but it's, at the end of the day, it's asymmetrical because you're kind of, the composer is to, to an extent, could be a small extent or a like near total extent, dictating what that player, you know, needs to do. So yeah, it's a form of collaboration, but it's you still get to be in control, and for that reason, yeah, I think for me, scoring is essentially a a one person operation.
So, most recently, you scored Waffles and Mochi's restaurant on for Netflix. So how did you get involved with the series, and what intrigued you about the show's concept?
Yeah, how did I get involved? Well, let's see. So before this show, there existed a show called Waffles and Mochi, um, and it's a great show. And but instead of doing season two, Netflix or the powers that be kind of elected to do sort of a this sort of, I guess you would call it a spin-off show, sort of a season two, but also kind of different. So um, a lot of things were changed about the show going from that first iteration to the new iteration, including composer. So um, they did like a new audition for composers. Um, and that already was kind of an unusual situation because, usually, it's sort of like, again, not exactly like entering a show in the middle of its lifespan, but sort of like it.
Hmm.
But anyhow, I was invited to audition. Um, as you probably know, I've written a lot of music for a popular Netflix kids kind of world, consisting of several shows called Storybots. Um, and I know that the people behind Waffles and Mochi's restaurant really love Storybots, and they love the energy and they love the music. And even though I've done mostly songwriting for that show, and Waffles and Mochi's restaurant was looking for a score composer, um, there were some they kind of they wanted the score to be very lively and animate and kind of with like a roller coaster feel, and certainly like a lot of the songs I did for Storybots had those qualities. So um, that's probably why I got involved in the audition, and maybe it made me uh, you know particularly desirable. But so yeah, I auditioned for it, and the audition consisted of scoring a couple scenes in that they were kind of working on, which is pretty standard. Of course, shows can acquire composers in all sorts of ways, but that's one of the ways. Um, and they loved my stuff, and it was a great way to get a gig because it like I already knew they kind of liked where my head was at with regard to the show. Like
Hmm.
they were like, "Oh, we love your audition. We want to hire you, and like we want more of that." And it kind of set set the set the stage for a successful gig.
And one cool thing about Waffles and Mochi's restaurant is that it's executive produced by the Obamas. Michelle, Barack Obama, for anyone who doesn't know who the Obamas are, but I'm sure everyone knows who the Obamas are. Michelle and Barack. So what did their involvement add to the series? Were they directly involved in the music, and what were they like to work with if they were?
Yeah, I lament to say, I did not get to work with them directly.
Oh,
And can kind of only speculate on uh what they, brought to the table, but I think I think if you look at the show itself, like it's got it's got great values and it's trying to do something good. In a lot of different ways. It's sort of bringing out parallels, across different cultures and, encouraging like an open attitude towards other cultures' food and eating healthy. And, there's general like positivity and optimism. It sort of has that like Obama quality. And, Michelle Obama, as an actor is incredibly charming and, her contributions are clear in that regard. So, uh, yeah, I think and so I think it really bears the stamp of the Obamas, and maybe even maybe even particularly compared to other shows they've done because Waffles and Mochi was their first show, the first show to come out of their production company. So I have to think that it has a special place in their heart, and a lot of thought was put into it on the Obama side.
hmm. So when you're scoring, like as you mentioned, Waffles and Mochi's restaurant is sort of a season two to the original Waffles and Mochi. So when you're approaching scoring the restaurant, the sort of pseudo season two, are you keeping in mind what was done in the Waffles and Mochi's original show, or because this is technically different, were you totally independent in the direction you wanted to go with it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it was kind of an interesting spot to be in because I was a fan of season one. Like before I had any knowledge that I would one day be working on it, I loved season one. I watched it with my family. It was like probably our like top, COVID like pandemic watch
Mm.
like comfort food television. We loved it. So I kind of had already absorbed a like feel for the identity of the show. And yet, the show and yet I knew they were going for something different.
Mm.
So I had to kind of, put aside my preconceptions about like, what Waffles and Mochi is, what it sounds like, and um, do my own thing. I mean, I knew they didn't want to continue on with, uh, the sound of season one because if they did, they would have kind of kept doing what they were doing in terms of personnel. So, yeah, it was a unique it created a unique challenge of like forgetting what I knew about the show.
Mm. And I mean, for the audience who may not know, Waffles and Mochi's restaurant is designed for a younger audience. Anyone who's watched some of the episodes, I actually got to watch a few. They're very cute shows. I saw the one with they create like the bumblebees and stuff like that. It's very cute. So and obviously the sensibilities for children is going to be a lot different than adults. Where I mean, I like to think that we change in how we approach things from adulthood to being children. I mean, I guess imagine we would. Um, how difficult is it developing music for children or creating something that would appeal to young kids? Being that you're once again from an adult mindset to think about what a kid would what would make a child happy.
Yeah, so I mean, it is different, but it's not a world of difference. I would say. I mean, I think you're you're a notch, maybe a notch more like overt with the storytelling aspect of the music. You have, maybe a bit of more of a license to be playful um, than in, adult oriented television, even sort of fun adult stuff. The music is still pretty transparent. In kids and family stuff, you can kind of show a little bit more personality, which is probably what I love most about it. Um, So yeah, and there's just a general, you're faced with certain kind of tonal challenges that are, I think, pretty unique to kids TV. I mean, for example, like um having watched some episodes of the show, that every episode has some sort of like emergency, at least one. They're usually uh it's usually like kind of a parade of emergencies, but at the same time the emergencies aren't really emergencies.
Right.
So in terms of the storytelling, music wise, you're kind of like simultaneously reinforcing this notion that like the stakes are high, there's an emergency, this is dramatic. But um I would usually kind of blend in some element to temper that a little bit and kind of remind the audience that, like, okay, but we're having fun, like, yes, things are getting out of control, but
Mm.
like, and it's serious but also kind of in a funny way, so sometimes, so it leads to interesting arrangement challenges where you'll have some kind of dramatic orchestral tension, like churning and establishing stakes, but you'll also have like a bebop trumpet in there, kind of adding some element of zaniness, and it's kind of making those arrangements work and uh, you know sound coherent. Um, those are this. Now I'm forgetting the question, but those are some of the different situations you're up against in terms of scoring kids in family TV compared to adult.
So, so when you're working on the score for a show like, let's say, Waffles and Mochi, restaurant, are you given the episode already? How do you find the essence of that moment in which to build the music around?
Um, well, that can, I mean, again, it kind of varies with different shows, but with this one, it was all like everything was already shot. Um, and like pretty much, I mean, I was dealing with rough cuts early on, but it wasn't long until things were like most more or less locked in. But uh, the way it worked in this case was like I got those rough cuts, and before we were kind of locked down to a regimented timetable, um, I just started scoring different scenes here and there, from like across the seasons, rough cuts, and sometimes there would be scenes that you know they would suggest. Sometimes there would be scenes that like I wanted to score just to kind of, because I felt like doing so would give some bigger picture of where I was taking it. So yeah, I just kind of scored different scenes, and we had discussions about how, like, yeah, every time Miss Obama, Mrs. Obama kind of gives this type of speech, pep talk or whatever, we'll do this, loosely, or sometimes we get more specific. There are a few sequences that essentially repeat every episode, and those are also things I attacked early on because obviously those are you know, crucial moments that need to be perfect. Um, I mean, everything needs to be perfect, but you know what I mean. Uh, and uh, so yeah, it was kind of, so that was the stage at which we tested concepts and palettes and themes, and uh, as is, and not unexpectedly, a lot of that work wound up getting thrown out because as the picture came together. Actually, this was an interesting one because um, I I put together a lot of scores to a lot of scenes based on sort of a certain kind of palette that I was sort of pitching in a sense, and we were all really liking it. But like once we started to see all these scores in sequence, we stepped back and kind of decided, oh, maybe it's actually too slow. Let's throw away like 80% of that and just kind of retain it in the parts where it really works. And so you're always throwing away things, and uh, that's hard when you're under the strain of like a timetable. But which is why it was so crucial and helpful to like have time to make those mistakes and get them out of the way.
Mm. I think the favorite piece of mine that you did on it was New Orleans, the New Orleans wedding, because I really kind of feel
Mhm.
like in see the New Orleans wedding, it felt like I was in New Orleans listening to it.
Right.
So, how did you develop and find like the essence of New Orleans? Is there some place you've had a lot of experience? Was there like, what did you think about it that or New Orleans itself that you thought this represents the concept New Orleans wedding?
Yes, yes. Oh, I'm glad you picked that one out. I mean, that was from the Bread episode featuring the Baker character who's from New Orleans. So there's a lot of New Orleans inspired music in that episode, even beside the brass band wedding thing. And I was so happy to do that because I love New Orleans and I love New Orleans music. It kind of there's a lot of like guitar and keys funk in that episode as well, which kind of played to my strengths as a player. Um, but for the brass band stuff, um, yeah, again, I was kind of well suited to that because I just have always loved brass bands. I have spent a lot of time in New Orleans, and uh, my oldest son's favorite genre of music is Dixieland for some odd reason. So I'm just like hearing it a lot, and uh, yeah, I guess I just kind of knew what I was doing enough to pull it off. I worked with a horn player who was also, well acquainted in that genre, and um, you know, he helped me, add some live parts and kind of put the arrangement together too. And I also worked with a percussionist on that one. Come to think of it, he was a really, really great player named Nick Vincent, who also, contributed something that I wouldn't have been able to just programming drums or something. So
Mm.
yeah, live musicians. I mean, New Orleans jazz, or New Orleans brass band, you got to have some live stuff in there, right? So, uh, yeah, that was a crucial component.
Like I said, I thought you did a great job with that piece. Like I said, when I was listening, I was like, I mean, I've never been to New Orleans myself, but I kind of felt like I was visiting, just hearing that piece of my background. I thought it was fascinating how you were able to just tap into that.
Man, thank you. That's a great compliment. I appreciate it. I'm happy to hear that.
So, Waffles and Mochi, it's on Netflix right now. Is there a second season coming? Or I guess it's technically a third season. You know what I'm trying to say? Is there a
Yeah.
following season coming?
I really don't have visibility into that, especially, and, you know, it really just came out recently. So let's see, probably a couple weeks ago at this point. So yeah, basically, I don't know. I hope so.
So, what's next for you?
What's next for me? Well, um, I mentioned Storybots, the other Netflix kids show. They have a new series coming out called Answer Time that I worked a lot on. It comes out, I think in a week or two, depending on when this goes live on your YouTube channel. Um, and also, interestingly, I'm working on a stage musical with my brother. That's something that I've been working on for a long time, but now I'm finding I have a little more breathing room to you know hopefully bring it to fruition.
Oh, very cool. Can you tell me a little bit about it? Is it you said it's a stage play?
It's a musical, yeah, and it's a comedy. It's not youth oriented. It's an adult comedy, sort of a semi dark political comedy, um, called currently titled "Enjoy the Ride," and it's about how repressive dictators from around the world acquire their automobiles. It kind of posits a fictional answer to that, possibly a fictional answer to that question, and like explores, yeah, this shady, again, this possibly fictional shady underworld of like luxury car brands, uh, you know, trying to get trying to sell cars to dictators on the sly.
That sounds awesome. So, is that inspired by any, without getting too political, any direction of fascism that may or may not be seen in our country in the future?
Yes, it's been inspired by a lot. I mean, I mean, I think chiefly it's inspired just by the question of like literally how do these guys get their cars? Like you see, you know, Kim Jong-un like rolling around in the Mercedes, and it's like, how did that car get to him? Or any of these guys, they always have nice cars. Their pictures in the paper, they're always like these motorcades, and they're these beautiful big cars and huge fleets of them. So, but in terms of more current event stuff, I mean, you know, I think, yeah, there were a lot of images floating around in my brother's in my mind. I don't know if I mentioned I'm doing this with my brother.
Yep.
Of like, the Trump, Kim Jong-un, like, nuclear disarmament talks or whatever that went nowhere. But there are all these pictures of them like, rolling up to each other in these like big cars. And I know that might have been like kind of a crystallizing moment. And then, now, of course, with like the war in the Ukraine, I don't want to give too much away about the plot of my musical, but I feel like there's some important parallels to that where that underscore the rationality and volatility of these dictators, and what a dangerous situation it is, and like the difficulties that are created when they're business relationships alongside the political relationships, like dependence on Russian gas and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, a lot of current event stuff has fed into it over time. I mean, we've been working on this for 5 years, so it's not like it didn't kind of directly come out of any single event, but it's an issue that it's timeless, because it's an issue that never goes away. It's just it's as old as humans have formed themselves into society. So yeah, it's hopefully both topical and timeless.
Well, I hope when it's ready to be shown, come back in the show to talk about it. It sounds fascinating.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. It's totally my pleasure to talk with you, Mr. Sokoloff. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. It was a lot of fun.